they say that the most horrific things in life are the things that can truly happen. And I spoke to Alan at the start, and he said he wasn't quite sure why we put it in with the horror. I personally think that's the most disturbing film we have of the whole festival.
Really? I should thank you for that.
Does anyone else out there agree that that's a disturbing and heavy watch? Yeah. So, tell us who you are and your involvement in, it's obvious in Alan's case, but tell us your involvement in the film for those people that haven't yet watched it.
My involvement in the film? Well, so I co-wrote with Alan, directed it, produced it, filmed it, edited it, did basically everything except the acting and the makeup was me. Not in an arrogant sense, just there was no money. It had to be me because there wasn't the budget for anything else. But also I quite like doing these things myself anyway. So yeah. So my involvement's quite heavy in the film.
And Alan, how did you come to be connected to the project?
It was all to do with a pint of Guinness, actually. I walked into my local pub, didn't know Ed, and he turned out to be a new barman working in there to help pay the rent. And he served me a pint of Guinness, but kept on sort of looking at me strangely. Eventually we struck up a conversation and he said to me out of the blue, "Alan, have you ever done any acting?" I said, No. He said, I said, "Why?" So he said, "Well, I've written this story and I think you'd be great in the part." So I said, "Oh, stop it, you're joking. I've never acted in my life." Cut a long story short, that happened.
When I first asked him, he said no.
Yes.
It was a month later when we revisited and he said, "Actually, I've been thinking about it." And I was like, "Okay, we'd just do a screen test and see how it went." And, well, seems like you rather enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did.
So my first question would be, when exactly did you shoot it? How long did it take to shoot?
So the first sort of bulk of shooting, which is the main part of the film, was about 7 years ago. And then it was just sort of, we had kind of the luxury of time where it's kind of a luxury because you've got it, but also because there's no deadline, it means we could still be finishing it until the day I die ultimately, but obviously you've got to kind of draw a line somewhere. So added various bits of it, and also because we had, the time to do it, we'd sort of watch it and be like, we could just go back and reshoot that or add that in. So most of the original script is what you see, but there were bits which were added and taken away and reshot because I was like, I just think we could do it better. Usually from my own side of it, like I could have filmed it better. Or like Alan was always consistent, but I like going back and redoing things if I can, which in this case could do.
So it's true labour of love.
Yeah.
And I think it comes off really, really well for the viewer. I think you put that, there's so much thought. It's very difficult, isn't it, when it's almost a two-hand. Well, it is a two-hander, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that your co-star is not a real person.
Mm-hmm.
But, you've got this scenario where there's so many camera angles. The camera is your second performer.
Yeah.
Technically. What was your longest setup?
How do you mean?
So in terms of getting the shot, because there's I was outside and I came in just at the bath scene.
Right.
And I think I counted something like 56 or 57 cuts.
Right.
So do you have a setup that, in your mind, just took such a long time and it had so much involvement? Because to me, I think, from looking at it probably 3, 4, 5 months ago, looking at it today, I think that's probably, for me, the scene that really stands out in terms of all the cuts.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you find that, because that was the scene that we added in later, and it took 17 hours to film. That wasn't a 17-hour bath. That was over several days. That'd be a very cold bath. But and it was one where we kind of it was one of the scenes in the film which is where Alan sort of stuck to the script that I'd written, because about 70% of it is kind of improvised. And so, filmed it from the sort of master angle, which would be the wide, which had the camera sort of like quite treacherously connected to the bath tap. So couldn't just, wide lens, because obviously it's all pretty tight in there. And then from that sort of like main angle, I worked out which ones I wanted to have close-ups of and where like I might have a bit of camera movement in, and then finally to sort of stitch everything together so that the cuts weren't quite as jarring, and also the quality of the bath, like the bubbles over the course of the bath go down. And so in terms of continuity, it was quite a difficult one to get. So then I'd film all of the bits where he's like, lathering up or whatever he's doing. That was all filmed last, when I knew exactly what movements he had to do for that shot to join with that shot. So I've never actually counted them myself, which is the sort of thing I would do, to be honest. But if it's about 58, then that would seem about right. I'm surprised it's not more, to be honest.
It probably was. That was what I saw, when I returned. I just remembered the scene as I was walking back in the screen, and I just remember I looked at that before, and I thought, when I first saw it, I was just thinking about all those different cuts, zooming in on Claudia's face, all that stuff that was happening, and you just sit there and you look at it, and then as I said, I just thought, I was sat there, I need to count this, I need to see how much is going on there. So Alan, talking of because you mentioned movement, not in a slightly perverted way, but I was watching the way you were moving around the bar, because you say you weren't an actor when you started this, but your movement is very interesting during the film. It's not like that in real life. So what sort of research how did you think about this role? Because there's a few scenes where you walk through the corridors and you kind of move in a really sort of strange, unhinged way. Did that come from anywhere?
I think there are many, many different influences, although I'd never acted previous to this. I'm pretty much a mad, fanatical film watcher. So and I'm channeling quite a lot of people that I know personally throughout the film. And the other thing, which I've said to Ed a couple of times, is that throughout my whole life, working life, whether I've been running businesses or working for other people, I've very much always been the salesman. And for me, philosophically, the salesman's always changing, always becoming something that the customer wants you to be. I've been involved in direct sales, which is very hard sales, and I was selling kitchens. So what I was talking about there was a real story. So I've lived a pretty long life so far, and I hope it goes on for a little while longer, but I've experienced a lot, and that just flowed through that film, and I don't think I prepared for it. It was instantaneous. It happened.
Tell us about the house. Where did the house? Whose house is it?
Okay, so on the end, we've got a special thanks to Hilary Lewis. Unfortunately, she's not with us anymore, but she lived up the road from my parents, and I used to walk her dog. And and for some reason, when writing the film, I always envisioned it being in her house. I have no idea why. I've always quite liked the house. And then she was going away on holiday for 2 weeks, so I just said, well, if I walk your dog for free for the next year, can I use your house for a film? And she was like, yeah, sure. So we did, and then obviously it became a bit problematic if we had to go back and film things, because I could never transform, because that is not what her house, that's not we put all of her furniture, well, the majority of her furniture and all of her she had a lot of family, very nice sort of homely house, but obviously he needed something which is more of a sort of bachelor pad type thing. So she allowed us to film in it, and then every time we'd have to go and film. So she was there when we were doing the bath scene, and she was, about 85 when we were doing it, very sweet old woman, and she seemed quite good and not weirded out by the fact that these two guys keep coming round, disappearing into the bathroom with a mannequin and a camera, and then coming out, maybe 3 hours later, one of them sopping wet. So, yeah, that's the house.
I think the really interesting thing about the house is it has like this weird timeless style about it. It could be, and the majority of the film, it could be the 70s, it could be the 80s, it could be the 90s.
I guess it's just the phone that's the giveaway, really.
And that's amazing, and that's what really, looking at the house and, the avocado bathroom suite and all those sort of things. Alan, how difficult is it as a person that at that moment in time hadn't acted to act on your own?
I didn't. I was like a child. I didn't know. I didn't expect anything. I just enjoyed the experience. He made it very difficult, has to be said. It was always do it again, Alan. And I did, on occasions, get very angry with him. But hey,
then we get the best take.
Yeah, I absolutely accept that. But no, if I was offered that role now, I would think very carefully about it. But then I didn't know.
It's very interesting. Now, I think what I'd like to do is I've got lots of questions I'd like to ask you, but I'm conscious of the time. So I'd like to ask the audience if they have any questions. You can put your hands in the air.
When you were writing, was there any decisions at one point to not have the makeup artist as a speaking role? So Alan was the only person who had a speaking role, so wasn't that a true one-man show?
So to not involve the makeup artist?
Yes, it's like off camera.
No, I hadn't, because the relationship, because although it's more or less a one-man show, because the majority of it is just, Alan and the mannequin, in order for the plot and the story to be driven forward, there had to be some form of interaction between, what's your character's called? Raymond and Frederick. And so as much as I would have loved it to have been purely a one-man show, that was kind of there to kind of keep things moving, because otherwise the last thing I wanted was for it to be even more sequences where he's just talking on the phone, because you might have noticed there are a lot of them. So I think it was good to just have just the injection of a character. But yeah, it would have been great if I'd changed things around so that, he develops this jealousy, but it didn't involve another person to get there, then I think that would have been a really interesting alternative way of doing the film.
Do we have any other questions?
Hello. First of all, Alan, I want to just compliment you. I would have never thought that you never acted before. I thought
thank you.
Acting was fabulous, so congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I thought this film had a really great creative world. And I wanted to ask where the inspiration came from to do that kind of story.
So I was in the bath one day reading, and there's a short story by J.G. Ballard called The Smile. It's about 7 or 8 pages long, and it's a very loose blueprint of that. It's about someone who's just sort of in a antique shop one day, sees what he thinks is a sort of mannequin, is kind of charmed by it for whatever reason, and then in that story it turns out that it's not a mannequin, it's a sort of taxidermied woman, but he forms a similar relation, and it goes off in different ways, but that was the original kind of spark. But then we changed, like if you were to read the book and then watch read that story and watch the film, other than the mannequin element, you probably wouldn't necessarily put the two together. So we just sort of took it off in our direction and made it more about, sort of misogyny, and look at that sort of more abusive aspect of how the relationship ends up. I mean, some elements of the relationship aren't abusive, but obviously by the end of it, it's pretty cold.
Great,
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Oh, gentleman in the middle.
Right, it was a very disturbing film. I just wondered, in terms of your own personal experience, have you ever witnessed domestic violence? Because there's a lot of emotion in that, isn't there?
I personally haven't, but Alan, you kind of did when you were younger.
I've come across it, yeah. Didn't experience it personally, but I've been aware of it happening. Yeah, is the answer.
It came out in it. In terms of eye for detail, I'm just looking at when you asked Edward to wipe his feet, when he came back again, I'm not certain he actually wiped his feet. But,
No, that was on purpose.
Slightly annoyed me, I don't know why.
Well, no, I mean that was written in. That's yet another thing that Frederick at that point, his character is certainly in his mind, but also just in general is kind of, he starts off very timid, and he takes his shoes off, and he's obviously quite scared of Alan being his boss. But throughout it, he kind of develops this kind of arrogance, which may come from his sort of like relationship with Claudia, whether he's aware that, I mean, it's probably pretty obvious that Alan's got some weird thing, not Alan, but, his character's got this weird thing going with the mannequin, and, we thought it'd be nice that as much as there's the film is ultimately the character arc of Raymond, that there was also a kind of like a sub one with the with the makeup artist, and obviously to the point where he's also kind of talking to her and, you know, besotted with her. There was actually an alternate ending, which was the original one which you didn't use, where so he's, you know, put her out in the bin at the end of it, and then the idea was that Frederick had kind of like loitered around the house and had gone back and kind of rescued her, and then the film would end sort of revealing that the mannequin hasn't been taken away by the you know, by the bin men. It's just that Frederick's now got her in his flat doing, you know, God knows what.
Thank you. And I think the final question is, who chose the pictures in the background? Because,
I painted them.
you painted them.
Wow. Talk about wearing all
I
hats.
painted those specifically for the film. That's not just what I paint in, you know, for fun.
Yeah.
They all say that.
I'd just like, so, you know, considering it is the majority of the film comes from two minds, I think you've done an amazing job there. I think, Alan, your performance grew in intensity to being really scarily unpleasant, and I hope to see you being scarily unpleasant in more roles. I think I think it's an amazing job you've done there, and the
Thank you
7
very much.
years
Thank
were worth it, because actually we all strive for a little bit of perfection, and sometimes we're in so much of a hurry to get what we make out that we don't think about just getting it right.
Yeah.
And you've thought about getting it right, so well done to you, Edward.
Thank you.
And, well, as I said, well done to you, Alan, for an amazing performance.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to see us.